September 9, 1956, the Sands Hotel, Las Vegas, 9:47 p.m. Elvis Presley was halfway through Hound Dog when he stopped singing, mid-word, mid-note. Just stopped. The band kept playing for 3 more bars before they realized something was wrong. The audience of 800 people went silent. Elvis stood frozen at the microphone. His hands were shaking. His face had gone pale. 21 years old and the newest star in America, and he couldn't move. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. The silence in that showroom was complete. Then Elvis did something nobody expected. He turned around and walked off stage. Didn't say a word, didn't apologize, didn't explain. Just walked straight into the wings and disappeared. The audience sat in stunned confusion. The band stopped playing. The curtain came down, and backstage, Dane Martin was waiting. What happened in the next 30 minutes would change Elvis Presley's life, but for 22 years nobody knew what was said between them. Elvis never spoke about it publicly. Dean never mentioned it. Colonel Tom Parker refused to discuss it. The truth only came out in 1978, 3 months after Elvis died, when one of Dean's closest friends finally revealed what happened that night in Las Vegas. The showroom erupted in confused murmurs. People looked at each other, looked at the empty stage, looked at the closed curtain. What just happened? Did Elvis Presley just walk off stage? The newest sensation in American music, the kid who'd been on Ed Sullivan 3 times, who'd sold millions of records, who'd caused riots and protests and moral panic across the country. He'd just disappeared mid-song. The band members stood frozen. The guitarist looked at the drummer. The drummer looked at the bass player. Nobody knew what to do. Play another song. Wait. Leave. The stage manager rushed out from the wings, approached the microphone. His voice cracked slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain in your seats. Technical difficulties. That's what they were calling it. But everyone in that room knew something else had happened. Something real. Something wrong. The audience waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. People started getting restless. Started talking louder. Started demanding answers. Finally, the stage manager came back out. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that due to illness, Elvis Presley will be unable to continue tonight's performance. Your tickets will be honored for tomorrow's show. We apologize for the inconvenience. Illness. That was the official story. But the people who'd been watching knew better. They'd seen his face. Seen him freeze, seen the terror in his eyes. That wasn't illness. That was fear. Elvis Presley was 21 years old in September 1956. His life had changed so fast he couldn't process it. 18 months earlier, he'd been driving a truck in Memphis, making $35 a week, living with his parents. Unknown, nobody. Then Sam Phillips recorded him at Sun Records. Then, That's All Right became a regional hit. Then Colonel Tom Parker became his manager. Then RCA bought his contract. Then Heartbreak Hotel went to #1. Then Ed Sullivan. Then movie deals. By September 1956, Elvis Presley was the biggest name in American music. Girls screamed when they saw him, fainted at his concerts, tore his clothes. Boys copied his hair, his moves, his style. Parents hated him. Churches condemned him. Critics destroyed him. Music publications called him a disgrace, a threat to American values, a destroyer of music. Too sexual, too wild, too dangerous, too different. Elvis felt every criticism, every attack, every condemnation. He carried them all, tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the music. But they weighed on him, crushed him, made him doubt everything. Vegas was supposed to be his big moment, his legitimization. If he could succeed in Las Vegas, he could succeed anywhere. But the Vegas critics had been brutal. The early reviews of his first shows were devastating. A jug of corn liquor in a champagne glass. Crude and vulgar, not ready for adult audiences. Elvis read every word, believed every word. By September 9th, he was drowning. Backstage was chaos. Elvis had locked himself in a dressing room, wouldn't come out, wouldn't talk to anyone. The colonel was yelling at the hotel staff, at the band, at anyone within earshot. Get him out here, get him back on stage. This is unprofessional. This is unacceptable. The band was packing their instruments, confused, upset, worried about their jobs. The stage crew was trying to figure out what to tell the audience. The hotel manager was calculating lawsuits, thinking about lawsuits, thinking about reputation. And Dean Martin was standing in the hallway, quiet, watching. He'd been at the Sands all week, his own show, his own audience. He'd heard Elvis was performing. Young kid, rock and roll, different generation, different music. Dean had been curious, had planned to catch a show later in the week. But tonight, he'd been backstage when Elvis walked off, saw the kid's face, saw the terror, recognized it immediately. Dean had finished his own show 2 hours earlier, should have gone home, should have gone to bed. But something kept him there, some instinct, some recognition. He knew that look, had worn it himself, many times, many years ago. The theories started immediately. Before Elvis even left the building that night, people were speculating what had caused Elvis Presley to walk off stage. Theory 1 was medical. Elvis had a panic attack, a heart condition, something physical, something that required immediate medical attention. The hotel pushed this version. Illness, they'd said, must be serious, must be real. A journalist from Billboard who'd been in the audience told people Elvis looked like he was having a medical emergency. His face went white. He couldn't move. That's not stage fright. That's something physiological. But Theory 2 was more cynical. Colonel Tom Parker staged it. Publicity stunt. Generate buzz. Get headlines. Make people talk. Vegas wasn't working. The reviews were terrible. The audiences were lukewarm. Maybe this was a way to create drama, create interest. A music promoter in Los Angeles heard about it the next day. This has Parker's fingerprints all over it. Nothing that man does is accidental. Walking off stage, that's news. That sells tickets. Theory 3 was darker. Drugs, alcohol. Elvis was drunk or high or both. Lost control, couldn't perform. Vegas whispered. Vegas always whispered. Performers had demons. Performers had vices. Maybe Elvis was no different. A lounge singer at the Flamingo told his audience the next night, I heard Elvis Presley was so drunk last night he couldn't finish his song. Walked off stage and passed out backstage. None of it true. All of it spreading. Theory 4 was embarrassment. Elvis forgot the lyrics, forgot the words to his own song, couldn't recover, couldn't fake it. Walked off rather than humiliate himself further. A music teacher in New York wrote in a column, stage amnesia is common among young performers. The pressure, the lights, the audience. Sometimes the mind just blanks. Perhaps Mr. Presley simply forgot his lyrics and panicked. Theory 5 involved threats. Someone in the audience had threatened Elvis, made a gesture, showed a weapon, scared him off stage. Security guards at the Sands developed this theory among themselves. Maybe someone threatened the kid. We've had problems before. Jealous boyfriends. Angry fathers. Maybe someone in that audience wanted to hurt him. Theory 6 was personal. Elvis saw someone he knew in the audience, someone from his past. Someone he didn't want to see, freaked out, ran. A Memphis reporter theorized Elvis Presley grew up poor. Maybe someone from his old life showed up. Someone he owed money to. Someone he wanted to forget. Maybe that's why he ran. Theory 7 was ideological. Elvis was making a statement, protesting how Vegas treated rock and roll, how the establishment dismissed him. Walking off was rebellion, defiance, artistic protest. A college student writing for a music magazine, Elvis Presley walking off that Vegas stage was a statement. He was saying, don't belong here. I don't fit your mold, and I won't try. Theory 8 was intimidation. Dean Martin was there, the king of cool, the Vegas veteran. Elvis felt inadequate, felt like a kid playing in the grown-ups room. I couldn't handle the comparison. A comedian at the Riviera. Dean Martin's in the building and Elvis Presley falls apart. Come on. The kid realized he was out of his league. All wrong. Every single theory. Wrong. Every speculation. Every rumor. Every elaborate explanation. Wrong. The truth was simpler. More human. More painful. Elvis Presley had been carrying too much weight for too long. And on September 9, 1956, in front of 800 people, he finally broke. Not physically. Emotionally. The criticism, the hatred, the condemnation, the constant pressure to be perfect, to be revolutionary, to be himself while also being what everyone needed him to be. It crushed him, paralyzed him, made him freeze on that stage, made him walk away. Nobody knew what was said backstage, not at first, not for years. The colonel controlled the narrative. This was the official story. Nothing more to discuss. Move along. Elvis didn't talk about it. Not to his band, not to his friends, not to anyone who asked. If reporters brought it up, he'd smile, change the subject. That was a long time ago. Dean Martin never mentioned it. Not in interviews, not to friends, not even to people close to him. The conversation stayed private, sacred, protected. Now you might think this was just a bad performance. A young star having stage fright. Something that happens all the time in show business. Performers freeze. Performers walk off. Performers have moments of panic and doubt. It's part of the job, part of the risk of live performance. But here's what makes this different. This wasn't just about Elvis freezing on stage. This was about Dean Martin, the king of cool. The man who made everything look effortless, sitting on a backstage floor with a terrified 21-year-old and revealing his own fear. In the first 2 videos of this series, you saw how Dean Martin shaped Bruce Lee's philosophy, how on October 28, 1968, tension on The Tonight Show led to a private conversation, how Bruce Lee asked Dean one question at 3 a.m. in a green room, how Dean's answer about staying calm under pressure changed Bruce's entire approach to martial arts, how Be Like Water was really Be Yourself, filtered through martial arts philosophy. Now you're seeing the pattern. Dean Martin wasn't just a performer. He wasn't just a singer or an actor or a comedian. He was a mentor, a teacher, someone who understood that real strength isn't the absence of fear, it's showing up anyway. Someone who'd learned that lesson himself the hard way. And on September 9, 1956, 12 years before he'd teach it to Bruce Lee, he taught that lesson to the man who would become the king of rock and roll. But nobody knew about it. Not for 22 years. The mystery deepened as the years passed. Elvis performed the next night, September 10, 1956. Smaller crowd, only fun 200 people. Many had heard about the walk-off, stayed away. Didn't want to risk another incomplete show. Didn't want to waste their money. But Elvis went on, finished the show, completed the engagement, then left Vegas. Didn't come back for 13 years. People noticed. Journalists asked. Fans wondered. Why did Elvis Presley avoid Las Vegas? Why did he never return after 1956? Elvis gave vague answers. Vegas isn't my scene. I prefer other venues. The timing never worked out. But people who knew him saw something else. Saw that Vegas carried weight for him. Carried memory. Carried something he didn't want to revisit. A bandmate asked him in 1960. They were touring. Someone suggested adding a Vegas date. Elvis's face went dark. No Vegas. Why not? The money's great. Just no. The conversation ended. Nobody pushed. In 1964, a reporter asked about the 1956 walk-off. 8 years later, Elvis was doing a press conference. Someone brought it up. Mr. Presley, there's a story that you walked off stage in Las Vegas in 1956. Is that true? Elvis paused, looked at the reporter. That was a long time ago. But did it happen? Next question. The room moved on, but the mystery remained. Priscilla Presley asked him about it once. 1969, they were married. She'd heard the rumors, the stories, the speculation. Elvis, what happened in Vegas in 1956? Elvis was quiet for a long time. Then he said something cryptic. Dean Martin taught me something that night. What? how to keep going. I don't understand. You don't need to. She didn't ask again, but she remembered. Remembered that Dean Martin's name came up. Remembered that something significant had happened. Something Elvis protected. Years passed. Elvis returned to Vegas in 1969. 13 years after the walk-off. Not at the Sands, at the International Hotel, different venue, different era, different Elvis. He was 34 years old, married, father, movie star. His career had evolved, changed. But Vegas still scared him, still carried the weight of that night in 1956. His manager mentioned it. You nervous about Vegas? Elvis smiled. Tight. Controlled? Always nervous about Vegas. You'll kill it. We'll see. He did kill it. The 1969 Vegas residency was a triumph. Sold-out shows, standing ovations, critical acclaim. Everything the 1956 shows weren't, but backstage before every show Elvis still shook, still felt the fear, still remembered. Dean Martin came to one of the shows, August 1969, sat in the audience, watched Elvis perform. After the show he went backstage, knocked on Elvis's dressing room door. Elvis opened it, saw Dean. His face broke into a smile. Real, genuine. They hugged, held it for a moment. You did it, Dean said. I remembered. Elvis replied. Good. They talked for 10 minutes. What was said? Nobody knows. But when Dean left, Elvis sat down, stared at the mirror. Someone asked if he was okay. Yeah, just remembering. Remembering what? Nobody knew. 1977. Elvis's final year. His health was failing. His performances were inconsistent. Some nights brilliant. Some nights barely coherent. The fear was still there, still present, still carried. But he kept showing up, kept performing, even when it hurt, even when it was hard, even when everyone could see he was struggling. A musician who toured with him that year, Elvis was scared before every show. You could see it. But he'd walk out there anyway. Every single time, even when he could barely stand, he'd still walk out there. August 16, 1977. Elvis died. Memphis, 42 years old. The world mourned. Tributes poured in. Stories were told. Legends were examined. Dean Martin was asked for a comment. He was filming something. A crew member approached him, told him Elvis had died. Dean stopped, sat down, stared at nothing. Dean, you want to say something? For the press. Dean was quiet for a long time. Then, Elvis Presley was brave. That's all people need to know. He was brave. That's all he said. Publicly. But privately, friends said Dean was devastated. More than they expected. More than made sense for someone he hadn't seen much over the years. Dean took Elvis's death hard. One friend said, like he'd lost a student. Like he'd lost someone he'd invested in. 3 months later, something changed. If you had been backstage that night, what would you have said to Elvis? Would you have told him to quit? To go back to Memphis? To give up on Vegas to protect himself from criticism? Or would you have done what Dean Martin did, shared your own fear and taught him that being terrified doesn't mean you're weak? November 1978. 15 months after Elvis died. Mac Gray, Dean Martin's longtime friend and aide, was doing an interview. Radio show. Talk show. Nothing major, just a conversation about Elvis's legacy, the impact of his death, what he meant to music. The host asked about Vegas, about the 1956 incident, the mystery. Mac, you've been around Hollywood forever. You know everyone. Do you know what really happened when Elvis walked off that stage? Mac hesitated. He'd been with Dean for 20 years. Knew his secrets. Kept them protected. But Elvis was gone. Den had been quiet for over a year, grieving in his own way. Maybe it was time. Yeah, I know what happened. The host leaned forward. You do? Dean told me. Once. Just once. We were having drinks in 1970 after Elvis's first big comeback. Dean had gone to see him. And afterward, Dean had this look, this sadness. And he told me what really happened backstage in 1956. The host waited. Dean found Elvis sitting on the floor, back against a wall, head in his hands, shaking. And Dean sat down next to him, and they talked. What did they talk about? Fear. The interview continued. Mac revealed more. Not everything. Dean hadn't told him everything. But enough. Enough to finally solve a 22-year mystery. The interview got picked up. Small at first. A radio transcript. Then a newspaper article. Then another. Then Rolling Stone. Then everywhere. The truth about September 9, 1956 was finally coming out. Elvis was sitting on the floor when Dean found him. Back against the wall, head in his hands, still shaking. The dressing room was small. Cramped. Not the kind of space a star should have. But this was 1956. Elvis wasn't established in Vegas, wasn't proven. Dean Martin walked over. Didn't announce himself. Didn't make noise. Just walked over and sat down next to him. On the floor, the king of cool sitting on a backstage floor. Didn't say anything at first. Just sat there. Presence. Stillness. Finally, Elvis spoke. Voice barely above a whisper. Broken. Defeated. They hated me. Dean lit a cigarette. Took a drag, still didn't respond. Just listened. Every single person in that room hated me, Elvis continued. His voice was shaking. Raw. I could feel it. The way they were looking at me. Like I was a joke. You feel that? Dean asked quietly. Calmly. Yeba? You feel them hating you? I know they were drag. Dean took another, exhaled slowly. The smoke hung in the air between them. Then he said something that would change everything. Kid, let me tell you something about Las Vegas. About performing. About this whole goddamn business. You know what I learned after 15 years of doing this? The people who hate you the loudest are the ones who are terrified you're right. When I started singing, the jazz purists said I was ruining music. Said my voice was too smooth. Too commercial. Too Italian. When I did comedy with Jerry Lewis, the serious actors said I was wasting my talent. Said comedy was beneath real performers. When I went solo, everyone, and I mean everyone, said I'd fail. Said I needed Jerry. Said I'd be forgotten in 6 months. You know what I did? I kept being me. I kept showing up, kept singing, kept performing. Not because I was trying to prove them wrong, because I knew something they didn't know. You're not destroying music, Elvis. You're creating it. You're doing something new. Something they've never seen before. Something they don't understand yet. And that scares the hell out of them. Because if you're right, if this rock and roll thing is real, then everything they know about music changes. And people hate change more than they hate anything else. Oh, Elvis was listening. Really listening. Dean continued. So yeah, they're going to resist you. They're going to criticize you. They're going to say you're too loud, too sexual, too different, too young, too everything. But here's the thing, 20 years from now, they won't remember tonight. They won't remember that you walked off this stage. But they'll remember that you walked onto stages, that you kept going, that you didn't quit, that you were Elvis Presley and you didn't let anyone tell you who to be. You got a choice right now, kid. You can walk away, go back to Memphis, drive trucks, live a quiet life. Nobody would blame you. Or you can go back out there tomorrow night, not to prove them wrong, not to make them love you, but to be yourself. Because that's the only way this works. The moment you start performing for their approval, you've already lost. You're not Elvis Presley anymore. You're their idea of Elvis Presley, and their idea will never be enough. Elvis was quiet for a long time, processing, absorbing, believing. Then he asked the question that mattered most. What if I go back out there and freeze again? Dean stubbed out his cigarette, looked at Elvis directly. Then you freeze again, and you go back the next night, and the next night, until freezing doesn't matter anymore. I freeze every single night, kid. Before every show, my hands shake. My stomach turns. I want to run. The fear doesn't go away, you just learn to carry it differently. Elvis looked at him. Really looked at him, eyes wide, disbelieving. You get scared? Dean Martin gets scared. Dean smiled, just slightly, sadly, knowingly, every damn time. They sat there for another 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time didn't matter in that small dressing room. Dean told him about Ohio, about being Dino Crocetti, about the immigrant kid who stuttered, who got bullied, who barely spoke English, about the terror of those first performances, about wanting to run, about almost quitting 100 times, about learning that the fear was part of it, not something to overcome, something to accept, something to carry. He told Elvis about a nightclub owner in Cleveland in 1943, a guy named Jim who'd seen 1,000 performers, who'd told Dean the same thing Dean was now telling Elvis. Stop trying to be perfect, just be present. Dean had spent 13 years learning that lesson, 13 years between 1943 and 1956, 13 years of carrying fear, of showing up anyway, of being himself even when it was terrifying. And now, in a backstage dressing room in Las Vegas, he was passing that lesson forward to a 21-year-old kid who needed to hear it, who was drowning in expectations and criticism and pressure, who needed permission to be scared and still show up. When Elvis finally stood up, something had changed. Not the fear. That was still there, still present, still crushing. But the way he carried it, the way he understood it, the relationship to it, Dean had given him something that night. Not confidence, not courage, permission. Permission to be terrified and keep going anyway. Dan Martin wasn't born cool, wasn't born confident, wasn't born comfortable in his own skin. He was born Dino Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio. His parents were Italian immigrants. His father was a barber. They were poor, struggling, barely making it. Dino didn't speak English until he was 5, got teased for his accent, for his clothes, for being different. He was shy, painfully shy, avoided eye contact, stuttered when nervous, hated attention. When he started singing in his teens, the stage fright was crippling, absolutely crippling. He'd stand in the wings before performances shaking, sweating, wanting to run, wanting to disappear. His first performances were disasters. He'd rush through songs, forget lyrics, miss notes. The audience could see his fear, could feel his discomfort. It made them uncomfortable, made them not want. He had talent. People told him he could sing. His voice was good, smooth, different. But the fear was eating him alive. He tried everything, drinking before shows, rehearsing obsessively, avoiding the audience's eyes. Nothing worked. The fear stayed, got worse. In 1943, he met Jim, the nightclub owner in Cleveland who'd been in the business 30 years. Seen everything, seen 1,000 Dino Crocettis, talented kids destroyed by fear. Jim watched Dino perform one night, saw the talent, saw the fear, called him over after. "Kid, you got a voice, but you're dying up there. I know. I can't stop being nervous." You think Sinatra doesn't get nervous? Sinatra. Every performer gets nervous. That's not the problem. Then what is? You're trying to be perfect, trying to hit every note exactly right, trying to make every gesture flawless. You're performing for their judgment instead of your joy. I don't understand. Stop trying to impress them. Just sing. Just be you singing songs. That's all they want. That's all anyone wants. Dino didn't understand. Not at first. But he started trying it, started going on stage not to be perfect but to be present. Not to prove something but to share something. It took years. Didn't happen overnight. Didn't happen in weeks or months. But slowly, gradually, painfully, Dino Crocetti learned to carry his fear differently. By 1946, when he met Jerry Lewis, something had shifted. The fear was still there, still present before every show. But it didn't control him anymore. Didn't paralyze him. He'd learned to acknowledge it and move forward anyway. The partnership with Jerry exploded. They became the biggest act in America. Movies, TV, nightclubs, everything. Dean was half of the most successful comedy duo in history. But the fear never left. Jerry didn't know. Dean hit it perfectly. Before every show, Dean would stand in the wings shaking, hands trembling, stomach churning. Then he'd walk out on stage and become Dan Martin. Cool, smooth, effortless. The mask was perfect. Nobody could see behind it. When the partnership ended in 1956, everyone expected Dean to fail, to collapse, to disappear. Jerry was the funny one. Jerry was the star. Dean was just the straight man, just the singer, just the guy who stood there while Jerry did the comedy. But Dean proved them wrong, went solo, became bigger than ever. Movies, music, television, everything. Because he'd learned the secret that Jim taught him in 1943. The secret he taught Elvis in 1956. The secret he'd teach Bruce Lee in 1968. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be yourself. Scared, imperfect, human, and show up anyway. By September 1956, Don Martin had 13 years of carrying fear, 13 years of showing up terrified, 13 years of being himself in front of audiences who expected perfection. That's why his words to Elvis had power. That's why Elvis believed him. Because Dean had lived it, had survived it, had thrived through. Elvis Presley went back on stage September 10, 1956. The night after the walk-off, the crowd was smaller. The energy was uncertain. People were curious, skeptical, waiting to see if he'd freeze again, waiting to see if he'd run. Elvis felt it all. Felt the fear, felt the doubt, felt the weight. But he remembered Dean's words. The fear doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently. He performed. Not perfectly. His voice cracked a few times. His movements were stiff, self-conscious. But he finished, completed the show. Walked off stage intact. It wasn't triumph, it was survival. But survival mattered. The next night was easier. Not easy. Easier. The fear was still there. But smaller. More manageable. More familiar. By the end of the week, Elvis had completed his engagement, hadn't frozen, hadn't run, hadn't quit. He left Vegas that week and didn't return for 13 years. Not because he failed, because he'd learned what he needed to learn. Because Vegas had taught him the lesson Don had articulated. You can be terrified and still show up. The years that followed showed the lesson taking root. 1957, 1958, 1959, Elvis kept performing, kept recording, kept creating. Critics still hated him. Parents still condemned him. The establishment still rejected him. But Elvis kept being Elvis, not trying to win them over, not trying to prove them wrong, just being himself. Scared, imperfect. Revolutionary in 1968, the comeback special, black leather, raw energy, defiant. Elvis performing for himself instead of for approval. The difference was visible, palpable. This wasn't Elvis trying to please anyone. This was Elvis being Elvis. The lesson Dean taught him had fully taken hold. 1969, Vegas residency, the return. 13 years after the walk-off, different venue, different era, different Elvis. But the fear was still there, backstage. Before every show, Elvis would pace, would shake, would doubt. His band members noticed. You okay, Elvis? Yeah, just you know. They knew, they'd seen it for years. But Elvis walked out anyway. Every show. Performed. Connected. The 1969-1977 Vegas years were legendary. Sold-out shows. Multiple residencies. Elvis became synonymous with Vegas. But before every show, the fear. And every show, showing up anyway. The final years were hard. 1975, 1976, 97. Elvis's health was failing. The fear was worse than ever. He'd forget lyrics, stumble through songs, struggle to move. But he kept showing up, kept walking onto those stages. Even when everyone could see he was dying. Even when it would have been kinder to stop, he kept going. Because Dean Martin had taught him that stopping wasn't an option. That fear doesn't disqualify you. That showing up terrified is better than not showing up at all. August 16, 1977. Elvis died. The lesson died with him. Or seemed to. Until Mac Gray revealed the truth in 1978. Until the world learned what had happened backstage on September 9, 1956. Until the pattern became clear. Don Martin had shaped Elvis Presley. Had taught him the same lesson he'd teach Bruce Lee 12 years later. Had passed forward the wisdom Jim had taught him in 1943. Real strength isn't the absence of fear, it's carrying fear and showing up anyway. The connection between all three stories, Dean in 1943, Elvis in 1956, Bruce in 1968, was unmistakable. Dean Martin had learned to carry fear, had spent decades perfecting the art of showing up terrified, and he'd taught that lesson to legends, to the king of rock and roll, to the greatest martial artist who ever lived. Not because he was trying to mentor them, not because he was trying to change the world, because when he saw someone drowning in fear, he recognized himself, and he offered them the same lifeline someone had offered him 25 years earlier. Just be yourself. Scared, imperfect, human, and show up anyway. September 10, 1956, the night after the walk-off. Elvis Presley walked back onto the Sands Hotel stage. The audience was smaller, only 100-200 people. Many had heard about the previous night and stayed away. But Elvis performed. Not perfectly. He still felt the fear. His hands still shook, but he finished the show. And he kept performing. Night after night, year after year, until fear became just another thing he carried. Like a guitar, like his voice, like his name. Dean Martin taught him that. In 30 minutes on a backstage floor in Las Vegas, the lesson that Dean had learned in a Cleveland nightclub in 1943. The same lesson he would teach Bruce Lee 12 years later in 1968. The same lesson that runs through every story in this series. Real strength isn't never being afraid. It's being afraid and showing up anyway. Not as who they expect you to be, as who you actually are. That's what Dean Martin understood, and that's what he taught to the legends who shaped our culture. This is the third chapter in Dean Martin, the man who shaped legends. If you want to see who else Dean influenced, the private conversations, the backstage moments, the wisdom that changed lives, there's an entire playlist waiting for you. Next week, we're revealing what happened when Frank Sinatra came to Dean's dressing room in 1953, broken and crying after his career collapsed. What Dean said that night gave Frank the strength to make the comeback that won him an Oscar. The conversation that saved Frank Sinatra's life. Subscribe so you don't miss it.